they convinced me that really at the end of the day, like say I do this and say I decide to go back to an industry like banking, all that's really happened is that I'm, 2 years behind. It's not closing any doors. It just means, I'm 2 years behind my peers, which I don't really care about. Like, that's not the biggest issue for me.
Welcome to How I Decided, a show where regular people share important decisions they've made so that we can learn from them in making our own life decisions. Hey guys, so I'm deciding to start a podcast. So this is my very first episode, and I've up till now been writing kind of blog posts, and then I met up with a friend over Thanksgiving, and he was doing his own podcast. So I figured, why not give it a shot myself? And I kind of already had an idea that I wanted to go after, which is this idea of decision making. I made my own really big life slash career decision a couple of months ago, and it really changed my perspective on how I think about decision making. I think it's something that's not taught enough in school. It's not talked about enough, and really it's not something that we're honestly prepared for. But I think the idea of this show is really to bring on people who have made really interesting decisions themselves, and hopefully we can learn something from them when we're trying to navigate a very complex decision that we're making. So really excited for this. I have a really great guest, Harry Lueken, who is my good friend from NYU. And back in April, we were basically kind of in the same boat where we didn't really know what we were doing uh, after graduation. He kind of had an idea of joining the Peace Corps, which is this volunteer organization. And I think you guys will really enjoy the story. Harry is also, I think, just really thoughtful about himself and what he kind of has planned for the rest of his life. And I think there are a lot of things that can be learned from our conversation. So hope you guys enjoy. And no, this is my first time doing this kind of podcast thing. So please give me any feedback if possible. Thanks. So for my friend Harry, this story is about him deciding to join the Peace Corps, but actually about 10 to 12 months before actually leaving for the Peace Corps, Harry had just wrapped up an internship at a bank and received basically his return offer to work for them full-time again after he graduated. But at this point, Harry is actually reconsidering whether he actually wants to even work at that bank afterwards.
So yeah, I'd taken an internship this summer after my junior year. It was on a leveraged finance team, and what they did was they provided financing for leverage buyouts. So you have a private equity firm that wants to buy a company, and we'd provide the financing for that transaction. I thought the internship went really well. People treated me great. It was a very nice culture. It was very open. People were super respectful, and I had a really good time there. But yeah, coming into my senior year, I started reconsidering my options.
Yeah, so I know you're rethinking kind of what you did. Sounds like it went really well, but could you just kind of get into like why you were reconsidering or rethinking and kind of your rationale behind that, especially since, it sounds like it was a cool gig with nice people around you.
The reason I was reconsidering it was because I'd sort of taken this job and like I'd accepted the full-time offer, but I'd never really taken the time to look around at other careers. I'd studied econ, and everyone there is sort of gunning for the same position. So that's really the only exposure you have. Like I was only exposed to people that wanted to do this particular job. So I felt like I hadn't pushed myself in a way to reconsider, like, is this something I'm actually interested in, or am I doing it simply because it's all I know, right? And yeah, as I said, I had a very good time there, but I figured, it'd be worth my time to explore a bit. And so at the start of my senior year, I started looking around, and then I stumbled upon the Peace Corps program.
Yeah, so you talk about like kind of being exposed to certain careers. Do you feel that like in college, especially, like depending on at NYU. There are kids in the business school. There are people doing economics. Do you feel that some people are kind of just like only exposed to the same few things, so they really don't get a chance to explore? Is that kind of what you're describing there?
Yeah, I think so. And also because it's like such a competitive industry, you also don't really have the time to explore other things. So it's a bit of both, I would say.
Yeah. And one thing I want to ask you about this and kind of changing your mind and reconsidering, did you ever get the feeling that you were being too nitpicky? Because I know something that I've felt before when I'm thinking about an important decision or making a change is that I've almost like stopped myself and started thinking about like, am I just not really, am I being like too picky about what I currently have? Is there really something that's better out there that's better for me, or should I just settle for what seems like a good option? Did you ever, I just wonder if you ever thought about something in that way.
Yeah, definitely. It was always a question of like, say I take another job, will I be satisfied there? Or is it, in my nature to never be satisfied with what I have? So that was a big part of it. And that was a big driver of my decision. Like I was constantly thinking about, would this decision to switch careers completely actually make me happy? Or, am I going to arrive there and wish that I was somewhere else? So that's definitely always on my mind. I think it's very much like typical of, college students, to be honest.
So you stumbled upon the Peace Corps, you said. How did you, I guess, find out about it, and what were, I guess, the preliminary research that you did to kind of look into it?
So I was always aware of it as a program, but I had never properly done research into it. So I the first thing I did was I went on the site, I read about all the listings they had, and I read about the program specifically. And so the Peace Corps, it's a 27-month program in a country that is usually a developing country that has requested a volunteer. And in a few decades ago, you couldn't actually pick where you went. You would just have to apply to Peace Corps, and they decide where to put you, which I think is insanely hectic. So I'm glad I had the opportunity to pick. But yeah, I read through the site, I read about the program, and then I decided to reach out to people that had done the Peace Corps on LinkedIn. And I was specifically reaching out to people that had worked in the Peace Corps and then afterwards had gone into banking or something like consulting, just to see how feasible it would be to re-enter that industry if I wanted. Because I wasn't entirely sure, like, I'm kind of coming here. Part of the reason for me being here is like a bit of self-reflection, like what actually do I want to pursue? Um, and if I finish up my time here and I decide, okay, I think I do want to go back into banking, then it would be helpful to know that that is a possibility. So I had roughly 10 meetings, either online or in person, and everyone spoke super highly of their experience, or not everyone. I'd say 8 out of the 10 people spoke really highly. And those that didn't, those that had a bad time, I'd ask them at the end of the meeting if they had regretted their decision of coming, and they both said no. So for me, that was kind of like the indicator that I should give this proper thought. Like I've had a lot of experiences, I think, where I'd hated the work that I was doing, but in hindsight, like I'm glad it had happened. I'm glad I made that decision. So it's comforting to know that like I probably wouldn't regret coming here, regardless of how I felt at the time.
So in like these conversations that you were having with people who did the Peace Corps, did they kind of help you with your decision in the way that you thought they would going into these conversations, or was there something kind of unexpected?
I think the biggest thing that I got out of these conversations is that they all convinced me. Like I had a lot of anxiety going to the decision, right? Like I didn't want to pigeonhole myself in development work if I, didn't end up liking it. They convinced me that really at the end of the day, like say I do this and say I decide to go back to an industry like banking, all that's really happened is that I'm, 2 years behind. It's not closing any doors. It just means, I'm 2 years behind my peers, which I don't really care about. Like that's not the biggest issue for me. So that was very helpful to know that they felt like I wasn't, you know, keeping myself here. And I guess a big part of it too was hearing about the work they had done. The program that I'm in, so the Peace Corps has a bunch of different kinds of volunteers. They have maybe 5 or 6, and this spans, things like health, teaching English, working with kids, or economic development, which is what I'm involved in. And basically what it is, it's a very open-ended project. So in the case of Costa Rica, we have maybe 20 volunteers in my program in community economic development, and each volunteer is placed in a different community in the country. And these are usually pretty rural communities. Like where I am is a town of 1,500 people up in the mountains. And so you show up to your community and you're supposed to spend the first 3 months kind of seeing what's there. You're trying to meet as many people as you can, interact with as many businesses as you can, and see exactly what the town needs. And then from there, you develop your own project. So that's what I really liked about it, what I liked hearing, the fact that it's so open-ended. Like I can basically decide what I'm doing. It's also the biggest headache because it's hard to have such a lack of structure, especially coming from college. But it's nice in that I have this autonomy.
Yeah, it sounds like kind of you heard more about what the work was and that it was more interesting to what you were doing. I was actually looking into just the Peace Corps website myself, and I saw that for the application you kind of have to provide like a why statement for why you want to do that. Could you maybe just get into like what you wrote for that and how that motivation was, I guess, how you would contrast that with, I guess, the work that you were gonna do for a bank.
Yeah, I'd written this a long time ago, so I'll try to remember. But I think when I had these conversations with the people that had done Peace Corps, they told me in my application I should emphasize that or emphasize similar experiences that I had had. So I had spent one summer working abroad. I'd also studied abroad. So in my why statement, I talked about these experiences and how much I loved cultural immersion, how fulfilling I thought it was to work in another country, in another culture. I also talked about the program itself. Like as I said, like I really liked how it's very self-guided. Uh, what else? And I talked about the idea of doing, a little more altruistic work, something that's a little more fulfilling.
Yeah, that's awesome. And one thing that you said that you mentioned earlier that I thought was really interesting, I kind of want to double down on is the idea of whether you could do this and then go back into an industry like banking. That's something that I think for me was my first instinct when I was thinking about kind of a similar career decision is doing this one thing going to close a lot of doors. And I think in general, well, I would love to know your thoughts on this too. I think in general, it's kind of more exaggerated that like people think that if they do something, they just won't be able to ever get back into a certain industry or career path. How did you, I guess you had these conversations with these people that did that assured you about it, but could you kind of like walk me through why that was kind of something you were initially anxious about and why it was like kind of important for you to know that?
A lot of the anxiety came from the fact that it's what my parents wanted me to do, right? I mean, obviously, like there's a big part of me that wants to do it as well. Like I'm not purely doing it for them, but I felt in a way, and I still feel that I owe it to them to, pick a career that they're happy with and that I'm also happy with. It's not purely for them. So that was where a lot of anxiety came from. But the way that I rationalized it, I mean, I'm saying it won't close any doors to me. I'll see what happens in 2 years. Like, I have no idea. But like I mean I graduate, I'm still 21 right now. Like I'm gonna finish the program when I'm 23. And I mean a lot of people graduate college late. Like if you have people coming from countries with, I don't know, mandatory military service, they're gonna graduate at 23, 24. So I didn't really see it as me entering significantly later than most people. That was one part of it. And the other part, I think you can spin this experience in a way where it's relevant. Maybe less so to banking, more so to consulting, which is another industry that I was considering. So I think at the end of the day, like as long as I'm pursuing projects that are somewhat related to the work that I want to do in the future, I'm not necessarily putting myself at a disadvantage once I go back into recruiting.
And just to clarify about the Peace Corps, is there something that's reversible? Like if you were there, say you were there for a month and you didn't really you didn't have like a good time there, was that something you could back out of, or is that something that you have to
Yeah,
stick
yeah,
with?
yeah. It's not prison. Like I
Yeah.
can leave whenever I want, technically. But I wouldn't want to. Like it was such a hassle coming here in the first place. Like the application process wasn't super tedious, but then they require this medical and legal clearance, which took literally months. Like I was accepted in January and I wasn't cleared until June. And so for that headache, like I wouldn't have wanted to come for a month and leave. And honestly, like when I first got here, I wasn't having an amazing time for maybe the first 2, 3 months of being here, but I'm glad I stuck it out because now I am very happy that I made the decision to come.
Can you recall the exact moment where you had in your mind and kind of in your heart decided that, if I'm accepted, I'm definitely going? And what did that like feel like for you?
Yeah. Honestly, it was a very delayed decision and I put it off for such a long time. So like yeah, I was accepted in January, but as I said, I wasn't cleared until June. So I technically like couldn't make that decision. Like what if I wasn't cleared, right? Like I couldn't decide I was going. I couldn't tell people I was going because that wasn't cleared. But I think deep down, I'd always known that I would take it, but I was just delaying the acceptance. Like I didn't want to think about it. Like it gave me stress. So it was nice in a way. The fact that I didn't know it kind of the fact that I wasn't cleared, it kind of for me it felt like it took the decision out of my hands. Like I couldn't really decide until I was cleared. So
So for Harry, at this point, he's already technically accepted into the Peace Corps, which is great. But turns out that for the Peace Corps, the documentation and actually getting cleared after you're, verbally accepted is more complicated than Harry thought.
because it's part of the US government, they're extra cautious, right? So the medical clearance is super tedious. I mean, if you have to disclose if you'd gone to therapy, and if you had gone to therapy, they require a list of notes from your therapist. Like it's that intense. So that's
Uh,
why it takes so long. And there's a big delay in their response time, which is super annoying. So that was a very big part of it. But yeah, in my case, like yeah, it took months, but I had it easy. I had a friend who's here right now who was told she could not come, and then the decision was reversed like 2 months before her leaving. So it's a bit messy.
yeah, that does sound like that could be a pretty big pain, honestly, especially if you had someone in your boat who's kind of straddling, I guess, this job offer that you
Yeah.
basically already accepted, and this new thing you want to do. So I'm really curious, like I guess during this period when you were already accepted but still not cleared, and it's getting closer and closer to both deadlines, and I guess when you're supposed to leave or when you're supposed to start work, like how are you feeling? Like were you nervous at all? Were you thinking about maybe I won't get to do this after all? Like how are you feeling during all of this?
It was more like I was kind of racked with guilt because I couldn't renege, right? And this was a company that had been very good, very kind to me. So I felt really bad that I couldn't, do it until basically a month before I had to start.
Mhm.
Uh, and I wish I had reneged earlier, but if I'd reneged and not gotten into this program, then I'd be left with absolutely nothing. And honestly, I knew that like if this program hadn't accepted me, or like if I weren't cleared, there were other options, right? Like I could have done a program in Colombia that would have been set to start 4 months or so later. So it wasn't the end of the world. It would just mean I'd be left doing nothing for a few months in between.
So you had other options that you could go to.
So yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the case with most things, as well as it feels like it's the end of the world or just this or that, but really there are so many other things that we can do, like especially like we just like went to a good school and university, and there's a lot of options out there for us. Um, and I feel like in general, like for the culture, especially of our school, it's like for some of the students in the community, it's like it's either this job or nothing, that kind of attitude as well. And that I feel like is pretty contagious for like
Yeah,
other people. And I know we talked earlier about exposing yourself to that kind of stuff. But it's like it can really get you, I feel like, even if you don't mean to, even if you want to be open-minded. So yeah, what at what point in the summer, I guess, did you find out you were actually going?
Late June, and I was set to leave July 11th. So it was maybe 3 weeks before I was supposed to start.
That's a crazy turnaround. So in those, I'm assuming those 3 weeks were like pretty crazy. Just
Yeah,
like
I mean, I was distracted. Like um, I was seeing family, and it had been a while. I was visiting some friends, so it didn't occupy my mind too much. I think my approach to making a decision like this is usually just push it as far away from my mind as possible. Otherwise, I'm going to overthink it. So honestly, like I just tried to distract myself as much as I could.
do you feel that you're someone who overthinks things sometimes?
Yeah, definitely. I realized that more so coming here now that I have all this time and space to think. I'm like, damn, yeah, I overthink stuff.
Yeah. No, I feel the same way. And it's taken time to see that and learn that about yourself. I want to ask you, is there anything you feel that you learned about yourself throughout this entire, I guess you would call it like 9 month process of, ending the internship and then until, leaving for Costa Rica? Like, is there something as you like reflect on it, is there something that I guess you learned about yourself or something that you want to keep in mind moving forward about, I guess, your own, life decisions and career path?
I don't know. I guess things don't have to be as serious. For me, like I in hindsight now, I realize like I think I gave me coming here way too much thought, and I had stressed myself out way too much, when really, like, now that I'm here, like I've been here 6 months and it's flown by, and I feel like in the grand scheme of things, it's not really going to change any career trajectory, right? And I'm very glad to have come here, and I'm glad to be having this experience. So I don't know, just don't overthink things.
Yeah, when you're making the decision, it often feels like it's a way bigger deal than it actually is, and it, you know, 6 to 7 months just fly by, and you're kind of already seeing that it wasn't as huge of a deal after all. And one kind of idea I want to introduce here that I recently was looking more into, that I got from a different podcast, is this idea of making the decision right. So, you know, I think what they were talking about is oftentimes, like what you said, people are kind of overthinking things, making it a lot very stressful for themselves, when in reality, most of the options they have are on par with each other, but it's what they do after they make decision once they get to this new place that really matters. And it's the idea that they're going to make this decision right. So you've been in Costa Rica now for half a year now. What are you trying to do to make the decision right and make the most out of this experience?
It's a lot of things. Firstly, like I want to put as much energy as I can into my work. I won't get into it because it would take a ton of time, but the work that I'm doing here is really interesting. I'm working with, all right, I'll talk about it a little bit, but I'm working in tourism. So I was placed in this town, as I said, called La Paz, very small town. And they have all these tourist projects, and they receive tourists, but they're only domestic, and they only stay for very short periods, like a weekend or a day at a time. And what they want to do is reposition themselves so they can start bringing in international tourists and also people that will stay for a long time. And I think it's cool. It's kind of like consulting, but a for a town as opposed to a company. Not to say I'm the consultant. Like I have no expertise in tourism or anything. I don't pretend to, but I can pick up. I can kind of start any project that I want so long as I pitch it to them and they're cool with it. And yeah, the town is beautiful. I think it's very well positioned. Like it's very close to the airport. It's on the route to other tourist spots in the country. So I think it has a lot of potential to be a popular tourist spot. Another part of it is spending time, kind of like self-reflection. Like part of the reason I came here, as I said, is because I didn't know if banking is what I wanted to do. So I'm kind of taking the time to read about other careers, to figure out what exactly I like, so that when I do finish up my time here, I have a better understanding of, what I want to dedicate myself to. And then a third part of it is like I have a lot of time. I know I said like I'm putting as much effort as I can to my work, but the work culture here is so different. Like I think it's completely opposite to New York. It's very laid back. And so, I do have a lot of time to myself, and I've been using that to like kind of explore hobbies that I'd always been interested in, but didn't have time to in college. So I think, yeah, just making sure I spend my time well is how I think I'm going to get the most out of this experience. And so I do like I have a very rigid schedule and everything. I've been reading a lot of books to help with my time management and making sure that I'm not wasting any days here. Because really, like one, it is so self-guided that, if I wanted to take a day and do absolutely nothing, there's no one breathing down on my neck. They're breathing,
Yeah.
on my neck. There's no one telling me what to do. So, I have to make sure that I have some kind of goals set.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to hear about the fact that you have this kind of space to think, and it's like it's very true that where we were for the past 4 years, like everything is super fast and in the city and all, and there's not really that much. I mean, you can think about it in terms of like physical space for like peace and quiet, but also I guess with the amount of work that we would have, like just in our minds to like just think about what it is that we want to do or have time to explore our hobbies and all. And one thing I wanted to ask you, I guess, about the culture of that, is that something that you knew about it going into this program? I guess the pace of life there, or is this something that you've kind of just discovered
I
when you got here?
I had read into it, but it's another thing like seeing it for yourself, like a totally different thing. And when I first got here, the pace of life kind of drove me crazy. Like especially like I've been in New York my whole life practically, and then coming here where the expectation for me is I'm working, 15 to 20 hours a week. It was kind of mind blowing. And um, I struggled at the beginning with all this free time. Like I did not know what to do with myself, but I've kind of grown to like that part of the culture. Not so much that I don't have much to do, but more so that, with this laid back culture, you have people that are just so kind, so down to earth, super open. Like I think they go hand in hand. And that's been like maybe the greatest part of me being here, like getting to know Costa Ricans because they're obscenely nice. Like I can give an example. My first month being in my town, um, I was in a nearby city, just passing the day there, and I had to take an Uber back to my town, which is a roughly 30-minute ride. And I get in the Uber, I'm talking to the driver, and we're talking for maybe 10 minutes, and he's asking me what I'm doing here, um, you know, and I'm explaining my program and telling him that I'm here by myself. And he's like, "Oh, I spent some time in the U.S. by myself, and I understand how lonely it can be, coming to a country and not knowing anyone. So I'll tell you what, how about next weekend? I pick you up from your house and I take you to the city that I live in, and you can come meet my family. You can meet my son who's close to your age. Like, I think you'd have a great time." So I'm constantly, like every other day, I'm having an experience like that where it's just mind blowing how kind they are. And so I really have grown to love the culture here.
Wow, that's a really cool story. Yeah, super super nice guy. Um, and did you end up going with that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I went. Very
Wow.
super, yeah, really nice family. I mean, yeah, I have like countless stories like this, um, which I think that's a very big part of the reason why they're so kind. Like they don't have all this stress, this like need to be working. Like when I'm in New York, if I'm not working, if I'm not spending my time productively, I feel like I'm wasting, my life, and it stresses me out. Whereas here, like their motto is pura vida, which is pure life, and I think it just kind of captures the culture here well.